Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to be moderating this debate. I'll start by introducing Sherin. For those who don't know her very well, Sherin is a sociologist of religion specialized in Islam. You are an Imam, and you are a psychotherapist. You founded in 2014 an NGO that you hold dear to yourself. It's called Exit Circle, and it provides support for men and women who are subjected to abuse and violence. But I think for me, the word that describes you best, based on what you say in this book, is activist. You are an activist who works to give women in your community, in your Muslim community, more rights and leadership roles by offering a gender-sensitive interpretation of the religion. Hence, this book, Women Are the Future of Islam. Can I just start by asking you a quick question? Are we going to say Imam or Imama with an A?
Let's say Imama.
Okay, do we know why?
It's the feminine A, so we stick to Imama.
Okay, at least we know. So I will move on to a quote. I thought it sums up pretty well a lot of your thoughts about women and Islam. So I'll quote you. So you say, "For us women, the struggle has begun, and it will be a long one. Tomorrow and even today, we're changing the way Islam is perceived. We will fight Islamophobia, we will fight against the patriarchal structures within Islam and the interpretations of the Quran that allow for the discrimination of women. I will repeat this tirelessly as long as ignorance is in power." You say this in the book. Who are these ignorants? Who are you referring to?
Thank you for the introduction, and salam alaikum, good evening. Thank you for being here. I refer to Muslims who put forward a discriminatory interpretation or reading of the Quran. In the first house mosque in the Islamic civilization, that was the house mosque of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Medina in 600. Women were actually leading the prayer for other women in the house mosque of the Prophet after his death. There is also a very famous hadith story where the Prophet goes to the house of Waraka and he asks her to lead the prayer for her household. So there are at least 3 narratives, hadiths, about women who led the prayer for other women. And some would even argue that Waraka led the prayer for both men and women, but it's a dispute which is still going on today. But we can conclude that women had a very distinguished role when it comes to disseminating the Islamic message. What happened? How come that we Muslims in 2018 still do not give women the basic right to serve as female imams in our societies? How come that we have normalized these patriarchal structures within our religious institutions, within our societies, in the reading of the Quran, in our families? How come that we still today have normalized these things? And I think that it started back then because the Prophet, peace be upon him, he actually blessed the concept of female imams. And after he died in 632, we had the 4 caliphs and the 4 caliphate. And under the second caliphate, that was the caliphate of Omar in 634, Omar, he forbade women to lead the prayer for other women. And he told the women that you don't have to come to the mosque, you can pray in your houses, because under that period, slowly the house mosque became institutionalized. So in that process of institutionalizing the existing house mosque, women were told that it's not obligatory for you to come to the mosque, you can pray in your houses. So my point is that the patriarchal practice started back then in 634 when Omar forbade women to lead the prayer for other women. And it has continued until today. Men have monopolized the interpretation of the Quran for many, many years. And unfortunately, some of the readings of the Quran have discriminated women in different spheres.
And before you get to this amount of knowledge yourself, you were somehow ignorant of your own faith. I think you only discovered your faith until the age of 19. And to me, after I read the book, I realized that actually it all began when you were 9 years old, and you recall this episode with your dad. When he's reading a newspaper, he says, "Sherin, come over to me." And so you come to see him, and he says, "What is your religion?" And you remained silent. And that was the moment where you started questioning your own identity. I have to say that your mom is Christian, she's Finnish, and your dad is Syrian Muslim. So what do you mean by I started questioning my identity? How did you end up finding your faith at the age of 19?
It's a long journey, and I'm still on that journey. I think that the conversation with my father, it triggered something in me, because I was only 8 or 9 years.
He was angry, you say. It made him angry that you didn't know back then what you
Yeah,
wanted
I remember
to be.
that he was very angry. It was an irrational anger, because my father, he's very dear to me, and because he made a compromise with my mother that we should have the possibility of choosing our own religion when we became old enough to reflect. So he compromised, and he didn't give us, me and my sister, a strict religious Muslim upbringing. So we celebrated Christmas, we celebrated Eid, we celebrated all the rituals within both religions, and I have to admit that the indoctrination from my mother was more than from my father, because she was more at home. They both worked a lot, but she was more at home. So
you had the chance to discover Christianity as well?
Yes, I studied Christianity as well.
Because
I studied the science of religion and philosophy, so I also studied Christianity.
Yeah, so that was the moment where you started questioning yourself until...
Yeah, I think that the fact that I have a Syrian Muslim father and a Finnish Christian mother, it laid the fundament for my journey. And I'm very happy and blessed. I feel very blessed because I had to navigate between different religions and cultures all my life. So I think that if the parents succeed in uniting different religions and cultures, the children will always be a step in front, because you have this psychological flexibility. In the age of 19, I knew that I wanted to study Islam. I wanted to specialize in Islam. The choice was between psychology and religion, and I chose religion.
It's through martial art, no? It's through a Kung Fu teacher that you decided. It's an encounter with a Kung Fu teacher that made you decide that you don't want to pursue your dream to become an actress.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
It's through martial art. It's an encounter with a Kung Fu teacher. It's a bit of an unusual encounter, no?
I mean, it was just one factor among many factors, but yes, I met different people who affected me in different directions. Mm-hmm. My first meeting with Islam was Sufism. Sufism is the spiritual path within Islam, and my father has always been on the Sufi path. I was introduced to Ibn Arabi, and to the studies of Ibn Arabi. I went to Syria, I did my thesis on Sufism and Islamic activism, and I met a teacher there. He was a scholar, and he was studying Ibn Arabi. So I became his pupil, and I was very lucky. And so I think that Sufism has played a big role when it comes to defining who I am, and also when it comes to the activism that I represent today. Later on, I started to read contemporary Islamic feminists like Amina Wadud, Margan Betran, Fatima Menisi, and others. but the initial inspiration came from the East when I was studying in Syria, and it came from the Sufi literature.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned this teacher is because you say in the book that at this age you decided not only to study sociology of religion, but also you changed your name. You're no longer named Anne Christine, but Sherin Khankan. Did you change your appearance? Did anything else change with the name?
Sherin has always been my nickname. Okay. So I took my nickname as my first name, and Khankan is my father's name, so it was always my name.
Okay. And yes. Then, as you said, you started during these visits to Cairo, to Damascus. I think at some point also you spend the year in Damascus learning Arabic. You get to know Al-Nur Mosque. And then you come back to Copenhagen, and I quote you saying, when you came back to resettle, if I may say, in Copenhagen, you say, I felt lost, alone, I can't seem to find the warmth I desperately need. I only see individualism and isolation. And then you say, in a community, magical things happen, and this is where you decide to set up something called the Forum for Critical Muslims. Tell me a little bit more about this group that you set up.
Yes, it was in August 2001, before September 11. It's so important for me to underline that it was before, because it was not a reaction to September 11. I wanted to create a community of believers. I didn't felt at home in the existing communities, and I really wanted to be a part of a religious community because I had been a part of the Abu Nur community, Sufi community in Syria, for more than 1 year. So I felt the magic of being a part of a community, of praying together, making dhikr together, and I started the Critical Muslims. And I think that the fundament for the Maryam Mosque was laid in this period where we started the Critical Muslims. I had my first vision of a mosque with female imams in Syria when I saw Sheikh Ahmed Kuftaru giving his khutbah, leading the prayer in the Abu Nur Mosque. And I had my first vision. I visioned the mosque with female imams, with a female mufti. And I thought, what would happen if the mufti was a woman or if the imam was a woman? I remember that we were always standing on the balcony looking at the mufti, and there was this distance, not only a physical distance, but also a mental distance, because we couldn't be close to the Grand Imam. And I wanted to change that. So in Critical Muslims, I wrote the first manifesto. It's called a Muslim Manifesto, where we were talking about our vision of a mosque with female imams. We were advocating for a separation between religion and politics. We were advocating for the possibility of uniting Islam and secularism, and we do not define secularism as they do in France and other places. We define secularism as a dialogue between religion and politics. Secularism is not identical to non-religiosity. So I also studied, I forgot his name right now. It's an Iranian author and philosopher who was very active in the establishment during the revolution in Iran. Abdel Karim Suruj is his name. So I was inspired also by his teaching and writings.
What was the context back then in Denmark?
The context, of course, like a month after we started the Critical Muslims, 11th September came and everything changed. It was like there was a before and an after. And so we had to use all our energy in defending our position as Muslim activists, as faithful practicing Muslims, because September 11 came. And the whole debate in Denmark, it transferred. It was based suddenly on fear, on feelings, and not on logical arguments or human rights arguments. So it was a difficult period.
Yeah, do you recall any major achievement apart from conferences and debates and probably the manifesto that you wrote a couple of years later in 2006 in a Danish newspaper talking about this forum? Any major achievement you're proud of during this time of your life?
I look at ourselves as a group. We were a group of intellectuals, and we were the first Muslim organization in Denmark who had a female leadership. So we introduced the concept of female leadership, of female Muslim spokespersons in Denmark. And I think I'm proud of that.
Yeah. And at some point you dip your toe into politics as well. And then you pull out. Can you tell me why did you decide, what put you off? Why did you decide to leave politics?
I was a candidate for the parliament, for the Radical Left Party, and people said that I would go straight to parliament. It was a very prosperous period. And then we were at a yearly meeting where we were going to vote for different resolutions. And then one of the politicians in the party, he set up a resolution saying that it had a headline saying no to Sharia law, and that it had a premises saying no to the stoning of Amina Lawal in Nigeria. And of course I'm against the stoning of women. All my life I have been working with violence and women, and it's really something that matters to me. But I was arguing that when we are going to fight against the stoning of women, we should not make a headline saying no to Sharia law.
Yeah, for those who don't know what Sharia is, can you just explain very briefly?
Yes, Sharia is, in the Quran there are around 350 verses that Islamic jurists have defined as Sharia verses. And Sharia is defined very differently by Muslims. Some Muslims want Sharia to be implemented as law in a given society. Some Muslims argue that Sharia is a way to be close to God, that it's primarily the 5 pillars and these 350 verses, but it's more like a moral, ethical, philosophical, political, spiritual guidance to a Muslim in a given society. And so there are different interpretations and definitions of the concept of Sharia. Sharia is implemented in different Muslim society through
you do
a
compare
concept
it to the
called
Ten Commandments in the book. You do compare it to the Ten Commandments, am I right?
Yeah, I mean, if you make a small definition of Sharia, you could compare it to the Ten Commandments or to the concept of loving your neighbor. So it's the path to God.
Yeah, so the controversy was about the Sharia law.
Yes, so of course the concept Sharia is a very positive concept to Muslims. So when you are combining the stoning with Sharia, it gives people the impression that Islam is a suppressive, dangerous religion. So I was arguing that we should make a headline saying that no to stoning of women, and we should do it like Amnesty International is doing it. We refer to universal human rights and not like demonizing a specific religion. It's a very long story. But to say very quickly, I lost my candidate because of this situation, and it was, for the last 15 years, it has been mentioned, and some politicians used this to classify me as a radical Muslim.
So this put you off. And I think in the book I realized that this is where your father intervenes again, and he says, I think you should devote yourself to what matters to you, a newborn feminism within Islam. Do you think, had you been a man or a son, he would have said this to you? He would have said, leave politics and go to feminism and activism?
No, actually I took the decision by myself to leave politics because I felt that I could act more wisely outside politics by being an activist. Okay. So it was my own decision.
Okay. I'm just saying, because you said I listened to him and I decided to leave politics and move to activism and feminism. Am I right to think that he was more present in shaping your career more than your mom?
My father?
Yeah.
No, I think
Because you only mention her when you say, at some point you say, she inspired you by teaching you, or by giving you the love for reading. But I think it's mainly your dad who's present.
Yeah, I'm very close to my father. I'm also very close to my mother. They both inspired me equally. My mother really inspired me in the sense that how she raised me and my sister. And she taught me that when you raise your children, you have to raise them without raising them. And because now I'm a mother of 4 small children, so I know that it's very difficult to raise your children without indoctrinating them or having expectations. And my mother, she never had any expectations. She didn't have these great expectations. And I think that's very important as parents not to have these expectations. Mm-hmm. But I was influenced by my father. I was influenced by, he's a feminist. He used to say that the perfect man is a woman. And I am very close to my father. Yeah.
And so presumably you spend most of your 30s, dedicating your time to your family, but also you just told me that you wrote 3 books. And so the journey that started with your decision, as you say, deciding not to leave politics and to start mixing activism with religion, it culminated with you founding the mosque, the Mariam Mosque, in 2016. So the Mariam Mosque, I'll say very quickly, so it's an 800 square feet apartment. It's in Copenhagen. It's the first in Scandinavia. It's led by a female imam, or an imama, as we said, we're going to say from the beginning. It's based on Sufism. I think the main important thing with this mosque is that it's breaking a lot of taboos, if I may say. So you are doing things that are widely contested within the Muslim community. You did officiate a series, or let's say, I think 20 or more of interfaith marriages. You are giving women the right to divorce, meditation classes. I went there and I saw the mosque. Am I right to say that it felt to me it's more like a home, a social, religious home, rather than a mosque in the classical way?
Yes, it is like the house mosque used to be in Medina, because before the mosque became official, you had these house mosques in different homes. So in Denmark, we don't have a tradition of having these grand mosques, so it's also a matter of culture and possibilities. If, for example, I went to Bradford, and in Bradford alone, they have like hundreds of beautiful grand mosques on every corner. But in Denmark, we only have 2 grand mosques, one Sunni and one Shia mosque, and they are paid from abroad. So, and besides that, we have hundreds of mosques in basements, in apartments. So this is like the tradition in Denmark. This is how mosques are established. And it's a matter of economy and possibilities.
And who are the kind of people who are, visiting the mosque, who are basically, who are part of this mosque?
We have people who come to the mosque for Islamic spiritual care. We have people who come to the mosque because they want to be a part of our Islamic academy. We have started an Islamic academy. We started an Arabic school for children, so we also have young children coming. We have people who come for the Friday prayer. We have people who come because they need a divorce or they want to get married, an Islamic marriage. We have people who come for dhikr. And then we have people who come from abroad. It's actually quite funny because we are the only mosque which is placed in central Copenhagen. It's placed on the most famous walking street in Copenhagen, very close to the synagogue and the round tower. So when people travel to Denmark, they Google a mosque and they find the Mariam Mosque and they come to pray during the week. And we have a lot of men, also Salafi men sometimes, who comes and they don't even look at us women, and they don't know that it's a women's mosque with female imams. They just pray and they leave again. So it's actually attracting a lot of people, also from abroad.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the controversy worldwide is not about women leading women in prayer, it's more about mixed prayers.
We decided to make our Friday prayers exclusively for women. So the Mariam Mosque is a women's mosque on Friday. But on all other days, it's an all-inclusive mosque for all. And we have men who comes to pray. We have men who comes for the dhikr, for the academy, for the Islamic spiritual care. And in the beginning, when we were going to vote whether it was going to be a women's mosque or a mosque for both men and women for the Friday prayer, I was voted down because I was in favor of a mixed mosque. But I'm very happy about the decision today because I realized that if you want to create change, you have to be aware and you have to do it very slowly, and you cannot burn all the bridges behind you because then you cannot be a bridge builder. So I'm really happy about the decision because we are on safe theological ground. 3 out of 4 Islamic schools allow female imams leading the prayer for other women. So a mosque with female imams leading the prayer for other women, it's not controversial at all. And because we are on safe theological ground, we do not receive any kind of criticism, and we can make the real important revolutions, which are women's right to serve as female imams, women's right to disseminate the Islamic message through the khutbah every Friday after Friday, week after week, year after year, women's right to interfaith marriage, etc. We have developed 9 theses of reform based on Islamic principles of justice. So I think it's actually very wise to have a women's mosque when it comes to the Friday prayer. I just want to add that Ibn Sa'd, he's a historian from the 8th century, and he has written a biographical lexicon called Kitab al-Tabaqat al-Kabir. So if any of you want to go deep into the topic of female imams, I can recommend this biographical lexicon. It consists of 8 volumes. The 7 volumes are only about the men in Medina who followed the Prophet, but the 8th volume is only about the women.
Okay, let me just intervene on this. So just so we finish this story about mixed prayers. In the book, you mention this Islamic scholar called Amina Wadud. She was the one who basically in 2005, she did lead a mixed prayer. It ended up being very controversial. So you do mention her. And very briefly you say that it will be the first Friday prayer of its kind since Prophet Muhammad reportedly authorized a lady called Waraqah to lead her household in prayer. You say it took 1,400 years to do it again. So obviously it's something that you're keen on doing. When do you think you will be able to do it?
I don't know. To me, it's not. I mean, we have a lot of mosques around the world. Did I tell you that? Did I say? Because I did a lot of interviews. Did I tell you where there are female imams? No. Okay. There are female imams in China since the 1820s. In US, Amina Wadud led the prayer for men and women back in 2005 or 6. In Canada, there are mosques with female imams. In South Africa, in Somalia, in Morocco, the state educates 50 murshidats every year, religious Islamic teachers. They do not lead the prayer, but they give Islamic spiritual care, which is actually the essence of being a female imam or an imam in general. In Germany, Halima Krausen was selected by the Shia community to lead the prayer, not to lead the prayer, but to be a female imam. In Köln, Rabia Müller led the prayer for both men and women. And in Berlin, they started a mosque. In Los Angeles, they started a women's mosque. They have a Friday prayer every month where different women gives the khutbah and leads the prayer on shift. And in Switzerland and in UK, you also have an all-inclusive mosque with a female imam.
So you don't know whether it's you cannot say that it's going to be the next step. It's too early for this.
I hope so. I hope we already
what's preventing
we
you
already
from
have
doing
a lot of men who comes to us and tells us that we really want to be a part of the prayer. We want to come with our families. So I hope that it will happen.
Okay. I'll move on to something else. So basically what you say is you want to change the narrative about the role of women within the Muslim community. So
no, not exactly. We are going back to the roots, we're going back to the sources.
Yeah.
And we're rereading the Quran according to our times and our societies. So the things that we are doing, it's not a reformation, because we're actually going back to the roots.
Yeah. So there are two things here. So either you're saying that there isn't any textual basis for, let's say, for not allowing women to lead. So this is one thing, and we got this from the example of women leading prayer. Or the other argument that you're presenting is to say, well, it is in the sacred text, but we need to reread it based on today's context. And you give a couple of examples about polygamy, witness, women being witness. I'll take this example of inheritance, and you say the Quran stipulates that a woman's inheritance should be less than a man's. And then you say at the time of the Prophet, only the man was responsible for the material comforts of the household. So therefore, because today things have changed and women are allowed to work, so you are suggesting rereading this verse of the Quran. Some people might think...
Could I just add? It's because the verse is not based on gender. The verse is based on responsibility.
Yeah, but my question is...
So if the premises are not there anymore, because women and men have equal responsibility, and so the verse is not valid in the same sense, because it's not a matter of gender, it's a matter of responsibility.
Some people might say, are you contesting the word of God? This is the Quran, this is not even the hadith or the interpretation. This is literally the word of God. Are you suggesting that we should reread the word of God?
I think it's very natural to reread the Quran. We have to read it all the time, and we have to reread it. And every time we read the Quran, it's like an ocean. You see new things, and you get inspired, and you get affected. So, and it's not something new what we're doing. Women and men throughout times have read and reread the Quran again and again and again. So it's actually something that we are obliged to do.
But it's a sacred word. It's something that's emanating from God, according to millions of Muslims. How can you just, come out and say, well, this is no longer viable today, so I'm going to change it?
We too believe that the Quran is the sacred word of Allah, but we have to read the Quran, and when you read the Quran, you have to interpret the Quran. So we are doing the same as scholars have done always. It's not something new to read and interpret the Quran according to our times and our society. And we have based our knowledge on other scholars' knowledge. So it's not something new what we are doing.
Yeah. Mixing feminism and religion, I believe, has brought you a spectrum of adversaries. So you have conservatives who probably think that you are, bringing religion into disrepute. You have the far right, they might think that Islam by essence is an unfair, probably violent religion, and say maybe they don't listen to you. Why did you decide to do it within a religious framework? I'm wondering, why don't you fight for women's rights outside a religious framework? And so in that case, you will be serving Muslims and non-Muslims, which is basically the formula you grew up with.
Actually, my work in the Exit Circle, where we are fighting emotional abuse, psychological violence, and negative social control, it's in the secular sphere. So I'm fighting patriarchal structures in the secular sphere, and the Exit Circle is for everyone, because emotional abuse, psychological violence, negative social control, it's a universal plague. It can exist within all families, within all cultures, religions, etc. But we have some specific problems within our practices of Islam. And if you want to solve that, if you want to find Islamic solutions to existing dilemmas in the youth, you have to operate in the religious sphere. So this is a part of our activism. Let me give you an example. One of the most important things, if you want to start a mosque with female imams and establish a mosque with a spiritual female leadership, you have to be engaged with Islamic spiritual care. Leading the prayer, it's only 10% of what we do. 90% it's about human rights. So Islamic spiritual care, it's when people come to you with their problems, and being an imam or an imama, you have to serve the people who come to you with their problems. And some of the most acute dilemmas of our time today is the fact that Muslim women do not have the basic right to divorce. Even in cases with violence, with severe violence, Muslim women cannot divorce unless the husband gives her the divorce. And we are trying to change that. We have constructed a new Islamic marital contract, and it is stated clearly that Muslim women have the right to divorce, polygamy is forbidden. If mental or physical violence occur, the marriage is annulled. So these are three premises that are included in the contract. In Denmark, only 2 Muslim communities give women the right to divorce in the contract. The rest of the imams, they will tell us that you can divorce, but you have to ask for it when you marry. And they don't tell them that. You have to ask, you have to put this into the contract. So, and who's thinking about divorce when you marry? Nobody thinks about divorcing. So it's actually quite crucial that we try to find ways to standardize an Islamic practice where imams all over the world implement women's right to divorce in the marriage contract. It's so easy. It takes 2 minutes to change that practice. So that's one problem. And you might think, some of you, why is this important? Because we live in Europe, and it's European law that counts legally. And Islamic marriage or divorce do not count legally, and that's true. But within the Muslim communities, the Islamic marriage counts spiritually, religiously, psychologically, and the same goes for the divorce. So if you divorce according to Danish law or your law in UK, still you can find difficulties escaping a marriage because the husband might tell you that you are still my wife. I won't give you the divorce. You still belong to me. So we have to find ways to solve these existing problems, dilemmas that we are facing.
There's no way to find a solution outside the religious framework if you...
Yes, of course, you can get your divorce easily through legally, but if the woman still feels trapped psychologically, religiously, spiritually, then you cannot tell her, you are free, you are divorced according to Danish law or UK law. She still feels trapped because she's trapped within a religious marriage. So we are conducting divorces to women who cannot obtain a divorce anywhere else in Denmark because the husband refuses. Another very important dilemma, and I think that's the most acute dilemma of our time, it's the question of interfaith marriage. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. My girls are 7 years old and 14. What are the chances of my 2 girls falling in love with a non-Muslim? It's huge because we live in Europe, we live in Denmark. The father of my children, he would argue that it's not a problem. It's not a problem because I have raised my children so well so they will not even think about falling in love with a non-Muslim. And this is actually not a very rare point of view. You also find the same view among Jews or Christians or Buddhists or other religions. But as a Muslim leader, as an imam, as a spiritual leader, we have to find Islamic solutions to these existing dilemmas in the youth. And in the Mariam Mosque, we have decided to conduct interfaith marriages. It is happening in a few mosques around the world, so we are not the only ones. But we believe that women's right to choose their love partner is a basic Islamic right. It is not stated in the Quran that a Muslim woman can marry people from the book, and it is not stated that she can't marry people from the book.
Well, I think there's something on this I'd like to say. You know, when I was working on your story, on the Imam story, and then I wanted to work on the inheritance law as well, often you end up, you find yourself in this situation where you present an argument with one verse of the Quran and someone else will come up with another verse or with another sacred text. It feels to me that it's an endless conversation. So yes, you can say something about the verse that you're mentioning, but someone else might come up with another argument. Do you agree with me?
Can I answer your question? Yes, we can have an endless discussion, and we will, because we have the right to different opinions within Islam.
Yeah, so what you're presenting is your own interpretation.
But what makes the difference, what makes the whole difference is activism on the ground. What makes the whole difference is that we have established a mosque. We have made it possible for women to marry non-Muslims. We have conducted more than 30 Islamic marriages, and half of them are interfaith marriages.
Who can say that what you're doing is legitimate or not?
The question of legitimacy? The question of legitimacy is always based on three things: knowledge, Islamic theology, and need. So, if people come to us, this means that we have legitimacy. If people seek us, it means that we have legitimacy. So we have couples coming from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, even UK, to get married in the mosque. It means that this couple gives the mosque legitimacy, and the families as well. So legitimacy is based on need, and it's based on people accepting you as an authority.
In this book, I felt that at some points you are using strong language. You use words like fight, struggle, battle. You, at some point, also mentioned the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. You say he's a tyrant. I think you mentioned him when you tell us about the opposition resistance group, you call it, that you established in 2013 in Copenhagen. At some point, also, you mentioned the veil. You say that you cannot measure someone's faith based on a piece of cloth. I personally felt that it was a bit edgy, extreme, because I think the veil is not a piece of cloth for millions of Muslims. And when you talk about narrative and I think wording is very important. Aren't you losing supporters by using, words like ignorant, ignorance, millions of people, or thousands, let's say, still believe in the Syrian president.
Describing Bashar al-Assad as a tyrant.
But not only, I'm not talking about the Syrian president. I think that's an under-exaggeration. Yeah, I'm talking about the language, ignorance, tyrant, piece of cloth. How are you defining the way that you are addressing these people?
When I talk about that's just one sentence that you are taking out of a context, because when I speak about women's right to cover or not to cover themselves, it's not just one sentence.
No, yes. I know, you mentioned
so
the hijab in a different way.
I'm arguing that women should have the right to cover themselves or not to cover themselves, and I would protect any woman's right to cover her hair and not to cover her hair. I'm against the burqa ban. I'm against the niqab ban in Denmark recently.
On the wording, do you think you're losing supporters by using these words?
I'm not really occupied.
But you're reaching out to people. You want people to come over to your project.
No, I'm not afraid of that.
Okay, let's move on to something else. Speaking of the veil, you say that you do not wear the veil. You only wear it when you're praying, but you do wear the burkini when you go swimming. Can you cherry pick faith? Can you choose one thing and not the other, depending on what you feel like? Or, how can you decide on your faith?
I think that Muslim as all people in the world, when we practice our religion, we use our imagination and we try the best we can to practice our religion. So the argument that you pick and choose as you like, I really don't like it. I think it's condescending, because it's not a matter of picking and choosing.
So why the burkini and not the veil? It's not the way you see it. This is not how you see it.
It's my own free choice. If I want to go to swim and there are other people, I would like to cover myself and I feel comfortable. So it's a free decision that I take as an individual. And I think that we have to decide for ourselves what works and what doesn't work, and we should not let other people define who we are.
So this book was first published in French last year, and this year it's in English. You told me that it's going to be published in Spanish, German, any version in Arabic at all?
Not yet, but I think it will come.
You think? You're not sure?
Not yet.
Okay. The reason
but I think it will come.
Okay. So you didn't plan it.
No, I didn't plan. I never expected that it would be translated to other languages. So I'm really happy about it.
Because the reason I'm asking about the language is because I'm wondering who you are talking to. Is it mainly Europe or is it only Europe?
No,
who is your audience?
I'm talking to a new generation of Muslims, but I'm also talking to non-Muslims.
How can you expect women who inspired you in Damascus or women who live in rural areas of Cairo to understand your message if you do not speak the language?
If I don't speak which language?
If you're not addressing them in their own language.
I don't understand your question. I wrote the book in English, and if the book is being published in Arabic, it will be translated into Arabic, and then they will be able to read it and understand it.
I'm saying this because you say we are here to transform Islam in Europe and beyond. We will go as far as China to put an end to ignorance again. So I'm wondering how these women who are based in Damascus or in Egypt, they will understand. I think you are an inspiration to a lot of women based in these. I mean, if you want to go to China, you're probably going to, you're going to pass by the Middle East or the Arab countries or the Muslim countries. Who are you talking to? And part of me is wondering whether it's another example of Arabs and Muslims talking to each other through the West.
I think that some of the themes that I'm raising in the book are universal themes. And these themes are important to women all over the world. The theme about Muslim women's right to divorce is a very acute theme, which is also very important to Muslim women living in Arab countries or abroad.
Would you consider going to Syria?
Interfaith marriage is also an issue which is important globally. So I think that many of the issues that I am directing in the book are important also beyond Europe.
Would you consider, for instance, one day doing this work that you're doing in Syria or in one of the Arab countries?
I mean, that would be a dream come true. If
where the narrative, emanates from, the narrative that you're trying to challenge.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to now move to questions from the audience. You're welcome to give, any comment you have, any questions. We'll start with the gentleman over here.
Thank you so much for your amazing talk, and I feel really proud that you are doing this amazing work. But I have a question. You said that you see secularism as a debate between religion and politics and not something without religion, right? But in a response to a question,
Could you hold it closer?
Okay.
Could you repeat it? I couldn't hear you.
Now you can listen? Yeah, so you said that you see secularization as a debate between religion and politics and not something without religion. But in a response to a question, you said that, when you have to deal with depression, emotional problems, you have a secular sphere for that. but when you have to deal with the problems within Islam, you have an Islamic. So I see a confusion there because I see there is a division between that, And my second question is, there is a lot of debate like, reinterpreting Quran in the 21st century, So my question is, why do you feel the need to go to a book? Because we are in the 21st century right now. We have human charter that give rights to every human being regardless of gender. And the Taliban are doing the same thing. They are going to the book. So what's the difference between Islamic feminism and these jihadis? They are going to a book which is 1400 years old. And we have like in the 21st century where we have evolved. So what do you feel? Why do you feel this need? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. When I established the Exit Circle, it's we live in a country in Denmark where it's very, very important to be very clear about, you cannot have religion interfere if you have started an NGO. It has to be strictly secular because it's for everyone. We are dealing with mental violence, psychological abuse, negative social control, and our method is the narrative method and cognitive psychotherapy. So we are establishing self-help groups, we are giving them cognitive tools, we are identifying the security behavior, and we're trying to deconstruct or challenge the security behavior. So it's not a matter of religion, it's a matter of finding ways to combat violence, and violence exists within any community, everywhere. It's a plague. So it's very important that we don't mix it with religion. But we have women who comes to the Exit Circle and they are in an abusive relationship, and then they tell me that I'm trapped in an Islamic marriage. I cannot escape my marriage. And then I suddenly have a double role. I can tell her that we have a mosque, the Mariam Mosque, where we can actually help you with getting your Islamic divorce. So we can transfer her to the Mariam Mosque, and then she can obtain her Islamic divorce in the mosque community. So this is the way we deal with these things. We have to keep it separately, and because we have to use a universal method. This is how we work. It's a decision that we have chosen to take. And your next question, why go back to the roots? And it's also a decision. If you are practicing Muslim, I have chosen to operate within the religious sphere, and it is something which is important to me. And I think that in order to create change within the religious sphere, you have to act within the religious sphere. You cannot only use human rights arguments, even though that I believe that the majority of the human rights arguments are also present within the Islamic tradition.
Can I just say very quickly that people on the other side are more than welcome also to ask questions. So I don't know, Anna, do you want to go to the other room? Or yeah, so we'll try and alternate just to be fair.
Hello. I want to ask about the difference between the new contract for marriage and divorce, the difference between this and the al-khula. Thank you.
Yes. When a woman asks for a divorce, we call it khula. So what is the difference between giving the woman the right to divorce in the Islamic marriage contract and then khula? Because we have given the woman the right to divorce in the contract, all the couples who are married in the Mariam Mosque, the woman can easily get her divorce. But if you're not married in the Mariam Mosque and you are married somewhere else and you come to the mosque, we give the woman a khula. So that's the difference.
I think we had a question from the lady in blue.
Hi, thank you. Just wanted to say, I think what you're doing is super interesting. My colleague Anna, who's actually from Denmark, told me about you a few weeks back, so it's great to be able to be here. But just wanting to hear a bit more about the sort of empowering elements that you cover, maybe at the mosque, through the classes, the sort of empowerment of women and feminism through Islam, maybe the classes that you were saying that you have, the spiritual classes and things, but the topics you cover, I think there's a lot in Islam that is empowering, so I'd love to just hear a bit about what you focus on.
So what do we teach in the Islamic Academy?
Yeah.
Yes. We have a course every month, 3 hours course, and we have like 17 courses presented. So far we have had courses concerning Islamic philosophy and Islamic feminism. So these are the 2 courses that we have so far. We also plan to have courses on Sharia, courses on also very practical courses, how to lead a Friday prayer, Islamic spiritual care, how to give Islamic spiritual care, what is Islamic spiritual care, Sufism. So these are some of the topics that we are planning for.
Next question, maybe?
Our vice president, he has a PhD in Islamic philosophy, so he's one of our teachers at the academy.
Anyone from the other room? Maybe? Yes, we do have a question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I'm really happy to be here today, and I really admire your courage to have a mosque for women. But I'm a bit confused about being imam for men. If you have any background or for this point. And the other thing, I would like you to recommend a scholar or a reference to tell us more about women's rights in Islam.
I can recommend Amina Wadud.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a great female scholar. She has written a book called Woman and Quran that I can recommend, where she's giving a rereading of the Quran. I can also recommend Shaheen Sadr Ali.
Sorry?
Shaheen Sadr Ali. She's from Pakistan, a professor in law. She did her thesis, doctoral thesis on, it's called Equal Before Allah, Unequal Before Man. I can, of course, recommend Fatima Menisi and Asma Lamrabet, if you're interested in the question of interfaith marriage.
Yeah.
Yes, these are some of the women I would recommend.
Right.
And your other question, it was about the women leading the prayer for both men and women. It's really a very, it's a topic, I mean, there are very different opinions on the matter. The majority of Muslim scholars agree that it's impossible, that a woman can only lead the prayer for other women. So, but you can find scholars who accept it. At Tabari, who actually had his own law school. We had hundreds of law schools within Islam, and then we canonized only 4 Sunni Islamic law schools and 1 Shia. But before these 4 schools were canonized, there were hundreds of schools, and the school of Tabari actually accepted female imams leading the prayer for both men and women. But as I said, it's a very rare view, and the majority of scholars at Al-Azhar and other places, they agree that it's not a possibility. But Amina Wadud, she's one of the female scholars who argue that it is possible, and people who argue for women leading the prayer for both men and women, they would refer to the hadith where the Prophet goes to the house of Waraka and asks her to lead the prayer for her household, for her dar. And they argue that her dar consisted of both men and women, so that the Prophet actually asked a woman to lead the prayer for both men and women. But you will find different opinion on that matter among scholars. So people differ in opinion.
I think, can I just very quickly interfere?
Yes.
I think the problem with the mixed prayer is physical. I think they do not allow a woman to be, or man to be standing behind a woman. Am I, is it correct?
Yeah, it's a social explanation, but I think that the majority would argue that if it's not a part of the tradition, then you cannot implement it. So,
question in the front here.
but I have to underline that in the Maria Mosque, we do not lead men in prayer. We lead women in prayer only. And because we only lead women in prayer, we are actually able to do all the things that we do. So to us, it has been effective. And I'm so happy that the majority voted for a women's mosque only on Fridays. And actually, I also realized that magical things happen when women are alone at the Friday prayer. So that's also something positive.
Hello, and thank you very much for being here and for whatever you're doing. My main question is about the title. So whatever fascinated me more, by the way, I'm a student, I'm doing a master's, so I'm dealing with Islam and feminism. So what fascinated me is the title, which in your book as well, it's apparent that it was not an easy decision. So knowing that, for example, in China, there are women that they lead prayer, but they're not being called imamas. Do you think it is important semiologically, as a symbolism, to have the name, or it is more important to pay attention to the function?
Both. I think function is important, of course. That's the most important thing, but I do believe that titles also have a symbolic meaning, and it is important what we name things. So if you start a mosque, if you lead the prayer, if you give the khutbah, if you do Islamic spiritual care, if you give divorces and conduct marriages, then you are acting as an imam. So, but the imam title, it's a non-protected title. So, and it has so different and varied meanings among Muslims. But an imam, semantically, it's a person who's in front, who leads the prayer, who leads the mosque. And, but because it's a non-protected title, it's also a very dangerous title because anyone can take upon the title and use the title. And this is why, for example, in Denmark, we don't have an imam education. And because of that, we have imported imams from other countries. They don't know the language, they don't know the culture, and sometimes they have a very rigid interpretation of Islam. So, of course, that affects the messages that they're disseminating. So in the Maria Mosque, we decided we have to rely on the Western educational system because we live in Denmark. So in order to become an imam in the Maria Mosque, we have set up the following criteria. You have to have at least that master in Islamic studies, in Arabic language, Islamic philosophy, or related subject. Then you have to take courses at the university in Islamic spiritual care. You have to take courses in it's a specific course in family law for religious preachers. And I am also a psychotherapist, so I combine Islamic spiritual care with cognitive psychotherapy when I give Islamic spiritual care sessions, which gives us a strength because when you are an imam, it's mostly about giving Islamic spiritual care. That's 50 or 60% of our work. So you need to know how to speak to people. You cannot validate or you cannot judge or when you speak to people, you have to meet them where they are. So there are different ways of approaching people. And to me, if you ask me what is the most important characteristica, combined to the concept of the imam, if you ask me, I would tell you that you have to find a person who knows how to speak to people, who knows how to meet people without judging. So that's the most important thing, without indoctrinating.
Question on the other side.
Hello, hi. It was great listening to you today. I just have two questions. So the first one is that in Islam, the mosque is usually, earlier, not now, it was considered this place of association for both men and women and not just in the religious sphere. So
cultural, even economic activities were supposed to be taking place in mosques. So your move to start, like, I understand that men do come to the mosque, but initially what made you start, a female mosque? Was it because you were not allowed any other space where you could actually associate and participate, or was it to make a point? It could be an empowering, but I mean, which one was it? Like, which had the greater weight? And the second question is, in the Islamic marriages that you conduct in the Maryam Mosque, what weight do you, or how do you interpret the notion of Qiwama for that like in Islamic marriages is usually given to the men? So what place does that take in your Islamic marriages that you conduct? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. The first question was, it was about the mosque. The mosque is not only a place of worship, it's also a place of knowledge. It's also a place of education where people gather, not only for worship and for dhikr, but also to be enlightened. And in many mosque communities, they have a center for knowledge. So this is also why we started the Islamic Academy, because we want to create a place of knowledge where people can educate themselves and find knowledge about Islam. And the other question, what was the other question?
It was about Qiwama. So when in the Islamic marriages that you conduct, how do you interpret, or how do you, inform the couple about the notion of Qiwama to the men? Because it's something that comes across when you're reading the Quran, it comes up. So
that the man has the responsibility, or that
Yes. So how do you
so are you talking about الرجال قوامون على النساء? Yes. Okay. Yes, when we do the Islamic marriages, we have the pre-conversations. So we, sorry, I feel so bad that you're sitting out there, all of you. We have the pre-conversations. So we invite the couple for conversations, and we also invite the families. We rather not marry people where the families do not approve. So we always try to reconcile with the families. And we talk about, marriage, we talk about the life, we talk about their expectations, we listen. And they have to be married according to Danish law as well before we marry them Islamically. I do believe that it is stated in the Quran, in Surah 4, that man is above the woman. This is how it is translated, or it says, Al-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa. But the word qawwamuna in Arabic, it has many different meanings. As many Arabic words, they have very different meanings. So qawwamuna, unfortunately, it's being translated with men are above the woman. And luckily, we have a new Quran translation recently by one of my brothers. His name is Amr Majid. He also did a biography about the Prophet. And in this new Quran translation, he didn't interpret the word qawwamuna with the man is above the woman. He interpreted the word qawwamuna that the man is taking care of the woman, that he's, I don't know the English term, that he has to encourage the woman and support the woman. Like, it's like a pillar that you have to stand behind your woman as a pillar, support her, encourage her in everything that she wants to do, in her dreams, in her goals, in being a mother, in being a woman. So that's the interpretation put forward, not only by this specific brother and the Quran translation, but you will see a lot of scholars who put forward these interpretations, not only women, but also men, they put forward. And this is also what we stress in our conversations, that when you enter the marriage, you are equal, you are partners. We have a 7 long pages, our Islamic marital contract, and it is stated many times that you are equal partners and you are equal responsible, and You have to respect and honor each other. So the man is not above the woman. The man has to take care of the woman. He has to encourage the woman. He has to be like a pillar. And the woman also has to be like a pillar and encourage the man and support the man.
I think that's all we've got time for. Sherin is going to be signing books in the adjacent room, so I'm sure
I
she'll...
can take 2 more questions, that's fine, if it's okay.
Maybe just one more, because we
One
want
more.
your recitation to be heard as well.
Yes, I have a female recitation for you. It's the first Danish female recitation publicly. I made a short documentary where you can hear it. It's really beautiful. So I just wanted to share with you how it sounds like when women recite the Quran.
Okay, so the last question, maybe the gentleman here? Sure.
Let's hear the women today. You can ask me
Thank you.
after.
Thank you, Sherin. It's a great honor and privilege to listen
Thank
to you
you.
tonight. I actually, when I first heard about you, I heard you in an interview on BBC with my teacher, Sheikh Halima Krausen, who's here. I think you know
Salam
her.
alaikum.
And it was interesting before I actually heard you on the interview that the press about you was actually quite, the British or the Western press was very sort of skewed and gave me very negative impression actually, so I didn't know what to expect of it. So I was quite surprised, and I'm also part of a British-based Muslim organization called An-Nisa Society, which we've been running for 30 years. You are sort of obviously doing it in a little bit more institutional way, but we are much more grassroots.
Can you hold it? Yes.
We're a bit more of a grassroots organization, and I was very interested in the way that you have explained how you are drawing from your Islamic inspiration to look for solutions and to bring men and women together rather than and pull them apart, which is something of the work sort of we do. But what I was particularly, my question is that, yes, people tend to focus on us as women in particular and say, your men this and your men that, and what this about your men. And we get a lot of hassle about our men. And actually, our men is not as bad as people make them out to be. But I find actually, how do you deal with a Western mindset when you're being interviewed or when you're being addressed, who just cannot understand the inner nuances of what you're saying, right? I mean, as a Muslim, I can fully understand what you were saying, and it made sense. But I find, even in that BBC interview, I felt that the interviewer didn't quite get it, right? So how do you address that?
Thank you for the question. I try to be patient, and I try to keep, making the nuances. I remember when I did my first interview in Denmark, when I started the Mariam Mosque, and it was Deadline. It's like Hard Talk in BBC, just in Denmark. I just went to the Hard Talk before I came here. You can see it tomorrow. And it was quite a very good experience. And when I was on Deadline in Denmark, it was so strange because I had 10 minutes and there were so many things that I wanted to say. And there were so many questions she could have asked me about this new mosque, a movement that became, that developed into a mosque community. But instead, she spent 10 minutes asking me the same question. And you know what that question was? She asked me, why don't you, I read in an interview with you that you do not want to lead the prayer when you have your period. Why don't you want to lead the prayer when you have your period? That's not very feministic. And I said, well, it's not a problem to me. This is how I operate. And she kept asking me the question for 10 minutes in 100 different ways. And I stayed very patient. And I just kept telling her that it's really not an issue to Muslims. We are 4 female imams in the mosque. They can lead the prayer when I have my period. Or I told her that I can do other things. I can still give the Islamic spiritual care. And the Islamic spiritual care is actually 80% of my work. But she wasn't content. She wasn't content because she felt that I was not a true feminist. I was not really fighting for women's rights because I refused to lead the prayer when I had my period. So we just have to stay cool, calm, and collected. And I think that's very important. And also, one of my strategies is not to focus on the opposition. Because when you start a mosque with female imams, you will meet a lot of opposition. And the question of legitimacy is always there on the point. But I always focus on the good stories, on the support, because then it becomes more legitimate to support the Maria Mosque. So I tell the story about the Grand Imam from Indonesia who runs a mosque with 200,000 Muslims who came to Copenhagen, prayed in the mosque with us, and he actually quoted Ibn Arabi, the perfect man is a woman. So, and he blessed the mosque, and he said that female imams is a blessing to our societies. I tell the story of Sheikh Fadlallah, who came from South Africa to our mosque recently. So these are the stories that I tell, because then it becomes more legitimate to support us. And I just want to end by telling you a story. It's a little story. It's so, I think it's very, it gives me a lot of hope. It was when I was preparing myself to lead the first Friday prayer back in 2016 in August, together with Saliha Maria Fete, a convert. And I was putting on actually this galabia that I'm wearing today. It's a present from my father from Syria. And I was putting on my scarf. And my 4 children were watching me. And my youngest daughter, Halima, she was 5 years at that time. And her friend was visiting the house, and she asked, she whispered in Halima's ears, "What is an imam?" And then Halima, she looked at me with very proud eyes, and she said, "Don't you know? An imam is a woman who's doing great things." So it is possible to change status quo. It is possible to change a narrative. It is possible to change to challenge the growing Islamophobia. And we just have to go out there and create that change. And we don't need to be a mass movement. We don't need a big grand mosque to create change. You just need a small place and gather a group of people. And then you can create that change on the ground. Thank you so much. Thank you.